Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay. I wanted to talk a little about the life, the legend, and the career of the man they call Sting. Sting has been a fixture in WCW, the NWA, the UWF, TNA, for a while in WWE for like a cup of coffee, and the and now AEW. He has been in this business for over 38 years. First breaking into the business in 1985 under the ring name of Flash in an independent promotion known as All California Wrestling. Now, Sting didn't grow up, Steve Borden didn't grow up as a wrestling fan. He was born in Omaha, Nebraska. His family moved to Southern California. At that time in Southern California, when he was a kid, the Los Angeles territory of Mike and Gene LaBelle was no more in existence. Vince McMahon had taken it over. So he didn't grow up as a wrestling fan. Wrestling was completely blacked out. He didn't even have access to it. But when he got into the bodybuilding ranks in his mid to late 20s. That's when he came across in the gym guys like Hulk Hogan, guys like, um, the wrestlers basically. Macho Man Randy Savage would come around and they took him to a wrestling match. And it was here he discovered something that he could do. So he was trained by Rick Bassman, he and Jim Hellwig, and they broke into the local independent scene in California, All California Wrestling, with Sting as Flash and Jim Hellwig, the Ultimate Warrior, as Jim Justice Hellwig. They were Power Team USA. Pretty soon they were discovered by Jerry Jarrett, and as I said before, anybody who was anybody went down to Memphis, and they were no exception. At the time, uh, something that I forgot to mention in the Ole Anderson tribute video, the Road Warriors had come out in the early 1980s, early to mid 1980s, and they were tearing it up in the wrestling world. First, they were in Georgia Championship Wrestling. Then they went from there to Vergania. Then they were the most popular tag team in wrestling, and everybody wanted a team that looked like them. All the other promotions, all the other territories wanted a tag team that looked just like them. So for Memphis and then later Bill Watts, they enlisted the help of Sting and the Ultimate Warrior. So they didn't last long in Memphis, just simply the fundamentals of the business. Then they went down to Bill Watts' territory, who at that time this was about 1986. Bill Watts was undergoing a major change in his business because he was taking the Mid South territory, which was based out of Louisiana, Oklahoma, Mississippi, the real deep South, and he was moving it west and trying to go national in the way that the AWA did with their ESPN deal and Jim Crockett Promotions on TBS and WWF with their various TV deals, especially on USA. So he wanted to do the same thing. But again, he wanted to market this team as a new Road Warriors. JCP had the real Road Warriors. WWE for a while had the Powers of Pain, and JCP also had the Powers of Pain. WWE had also Demolition. Hell, um, the NWA before the Road Warriors got there tried to market Scott Hall and Danny Spivey as Starship USA, as Starship USA. So everybody wanted these big power teams, but it didn't really work out with Jim Hellwig in in the UWF slash Mid South. He didn't really get along with Bill Watts. He considered Bill Watts a bully, so they send him off to World Class Championship Wrestling, where he becomes the Dingo Warrior, and he he, he becomes managed by Gary Hart. But Sting stays behind. We market Sting as a vicious heel in the company. He hooks up with his manager, Eddie Gilbert, and Missy Hyatt, and he even wins the tag team championships with Eddie Gilbert. And pretty soon, Rick Steiner is breaking into the business, and Rick Steiner then becomes his tag team partner. So the partnership with Rick Steiner lasts a little while until people are starting to notice that Sting is getting, because of his look and because of the fact that now the Ultimate Warrior is in the WWF. He's made his debut in the WWF, and his look is very similar. Remember, Ultimate Warrior's debut in the WWF was very explosive. He comes onto the scene, and what does he do? Within mere seconds, defeats one of the longest running Intercontinental champions in history in the Honky Tonk Man. So UWF is starting to notice this. So what do they have? They have the idea to turn Sting, have Rick Steiner, Eddie Gilbert, and Missy Hyatt turn on Sting, and now Sting now is a babyface, and this is 87, right? 87, 88-ish. Around this time, what's going on behind the scenes, as we know, Jim Crockett Promotions is being purchased it's purchasing UWF. They're buying out UWF because remember, UWF is going under because of the oil bust. So they plan to merge the rosters. And behind the scenes, Eddie Gilbert, Sting's former manager, is saying good things in the wrestling magazines about Sting, that he could be the next big mega star. So that's exactly what happens. Sting turns babyface, and UWF gets bought out by the NWA, by Jim Crockett Promotions. And Sting, along with Rick Steiner, is one of those stars that Jim Crockett Promotions does promote. So much so that Ric Flair, who's the top guy in Jim Crockett Promotions, wants to work with Sting. That's exactly what happens towards the end of towards the beginning of 1988. Keep in mind what happened in 87. In 87, it was supposed to be the biggest babyface in Jim Crockett Promotions / NWA Magnum TA to take on Ric Flair at Starrcade. He gets injured in his motorcycle accident. They put Ronnie Garvin in his place for Starrcade 87. It's a lame main event. Nobody likes it. But also what's going on behind the scenes, Vince McMahon has just premiered his second pay-per-view, Starrcade 87. And he's telling the cable companies that Survivor Series 87. He's telling the cable companies if they air Starrcade 87, then they won't be able to carry his next biggest pay-per-view, WrestleMania 4. So the cable companies opt to not carry Starrcade 87. So not only is it a big flop because Ronnie Garvin is the champion, it's also a big flop because most cable companies don't carry it, and they instead choose to carry the first Survivor Series. So what do they counter with? WrestleMania 4 comes around. And of course, most cable companies carry WrestleMania 4. But Jim Crockett Promotions has the idea to carry a free event, the first Clash of Champions in 1988, a free event featuring Ric Flair putting up the the NWA Heavyweight Championship against the newcomer, Sting, and they wrestle to a 30-minute draw on free TV. And more people see this match between Sting and Ric Flair than see the tournament match that ended between the Macho Man Randy Savage and the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase. So Sting now makes a huge impact, and from this point on, from 1988 on, he becomes the face of WCW. And when everybody leaves, when the Ric Flairs leave, Ric Flair eventually leaves in 1991 to go to the WWE. Other wrestlers are always leaving, going for the bigger money. Sting never left. Sting stood loyal. Throughout in 1988, he continues his feud with the Four Horsemen, continues going at Ric Flair. And in 1989, Future Shock, they devised Starcade to be a tournament type deal. He has a great match with the Great Muta on that show, and it ends with he and Ric Flair once again. Um, in 1990, that's perhaps his biggest year because Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard had left the company, but now they're back. So they want to form the Four Horsemen. All throughout Sting and Flair's matches, they teamed up in Halloween Havoc with one another to take on Muta and Terry Funk. Ric Flair has been having this crazy feud with Terry Funk. Remember, after Ric Flair um, won the championship back in that great series that he had with Ricky Steamboat in 1989, he gets attacked by Terry Funk, pile driving him through a table, and now he's become babyface. And Terry Funk enlists the help of Gary Hart, the Great Muta, and Buzz Sawyer to beat him up. So he enlists the help of the Four Horsemen now with Arn and Tully Blanchard back in the company. So he needs a fourth horseman. Sting becomes his fourth horseman. Like I said, they've already been teaming together a lot. They used to be enemies. Now they're teaming together. It doesn't last for long, however, because Sting becomes in 1990 the number one contender, and the Four Horsemen tell him, "Listen, there can only be one big dog in town. You have to denounce your number one contendership if you want to remain in the Four Horsemen." He doesn't do that. The the, the Horsemen beat him up, but later that night, he and Ric Flair still have to have that cage match against Terry Funk and Muta, and trying to get away, he tears his patella tendon and he's out for a couple of months. So his title win, his first WCW title win, is delayed. But finally, at the Great American Bash, he and Ric Flair have a tremendous match. He defeats Ric Flair for the WCW Championship. Now, he and his former partner across the way in the other channel, the Ultimate Warrior, has just ascended to the top of the ranks, and he too has become the WWF champion by defeating Hulk Hogan in Toronto's Skydome. So both guys are doing pretty well. It doesn't last long for either guy, but for Sting, it's even shorter. Not too long after that, he drops the belt back to Ric Flair, and they go on the whole Black Scorpion thing. Sting is being attacked by the Black Scorpion. He doesn't know who the Black Scorpion is. We went over it in the Ole Anderson video where I said it was one of the worst things that Ole Anderson ever wrote as it pertains to his time as a booker in the early days in WCW. But anyway, it ends in Starrcade 1990 with Sting pulling off the Black Scorpion mask and revealing that Ric Flair was a Black Scorpion. They did this like twice. There was one time at it was Halloween Havoc. No, that was 91. I haven't gotten there yet. Was it a one Halloween Havoc where Sting is wrestling Sid Vicious, and all of a sudden he thinks he pinned Sid Vicious. Sid Vicious thinks he pinned him, but it was Barry Windham dressed in a Sting outfit. Crazy stuff. Let's see. No, my mistake. It was Halloween Havoc 1990. I was right the first time. He Sid thinks he beat him, but it's Barry Windham dressed in his outfit. So they were doing all kinds of crazy shit with Sting in 1990, man. 1991, he begins his feud with the Dangerous Alliance. Ric Flair has left the WCW, so they need a new faction group. Rick Rude has jumped from WWF to WCW. He was originally the WCW Halloween Phantom. managed by Paul Heyman, and Paul Heyman, who is then known as Paulie Dangerously, forms this super mega group called the Dangerous Alliance with Stunning Steve Austin, Rick Rude, Arn Anderson, Larry Zbyszko, and Bobby Eaton. And they take on Sting's squadron at that year's, I mean, that following year's Fall Brawl. Also during 1991, Sting begins his feuds with Abdullah the Butcher and Cactus Jack. Seems like they're throwing everything at Sting in 1991. But a good thing about Sting in 1991, he also goes on to be the first Battle Bowl winner, a new match concept that Dusty Rhodes has come up with in that bay faces and heels team up together, and the winner of these bay faces and heel matches go on to have a battle royal. And Sting becomes the first Battle Bowl winner. Good for Sting. In 1992, at the beginning of 1992, he wins the WCW championship once again. Lex Luger has turned on him. Now Lex Luger is now a heel, and obviously because he turned heel by defeating Barry Windham at the Great American Bash 1991. But he didn't really turn on Sting until much later. When it came to Sting, they were still friends, but now Luger is really egotistical. He attacked Sting. Uh, he came out of a box for Sting's birthday, hit Sting with the forearm, and knocked Sting out. So now he and Sting are headed for a collision, Super Brawl 2 in 1992, which would end up being Lex Luger's last match for many years in WCW. Sting defeats him. At least so what's going on. Sting defeats him, and he becomes the WCW champion for the second time in a row. Now Sting is WCW champion. He has a lot of contenders, but the biggest contender that he has is 450-pound mastodon Big Van Vader. Big Van Vader is his toughest opponent. They have the White Castle of Fear vignettes as they're going into Super Bowl 3, the leather strap match. The feud really began at Starrcade 92 when they had the King of the Cable match. It was an incredible match that they had. But now, this January of 1993, they're going into the leather strap match. And man, the matches they had together were brutal. It was Vader who first ended Sting's second reign. Then Vader loses it to Ron Simmons in that historic win where Ron Simmons becomes the first black heavyweight champion in WCW. And then they have the leather strap match. And like I said, it was a brutal leather strap match. Incredible. Sting and Vader battled each other almost throughout the entire year, basically, until Sting went on to team with Road Warrior Hawk. At the end of the year, Road Warrior Hawk no longer in WWE, left WWE after SummerSlam 92. Then now he needs a partner. So he and Sting team up to challenge the Nasty Boys for the Tag Team Championships at Starrcade 93. Now, okay, when it comes to 1994, Sting now in 1994, everything is about to change. WCW is about to undergo major changes. How and why? Well, Hulk Hogan is coming into the company. Hulk Hogan left WWE June of 1993, defeated by Yokozuna for he lost his fifth WWF championship. So he's decided to sign with WCW. Now, he's never faced Sting. They have similar gimmicks. Both guys are billed from Venice Beach, California. Both guys are huge over mega baby faces. So people are wondering, how is Sting going to react to Hogan coming to WCW? Well, Hogan comes to WCW and defeats Ric Flair 3 times in a row, and Sting welcomes him with open arms, and they become friends. But this group, the Three Faces of Fear, Kevin Sullivan, Avalanche, who was formerly Earthquake, John Tenta, and Brutus Beefcake, who turned on Hulk Hogan in Halloween Havoc that year in '94, uh, are going after Hogan. The Macho Man has jumped ship. He's come in to help Hulk Hogan at Starrcade '94. He came in. He said, "I'm either gonna shake Hulk Hogan's hand or slap him in the face." He ended up shaking Hogan's hand and helping Hogan after he was ambushed after the match with the Butcher. But Sting also is helping him. Sting that same night, Starrcade '94, he has a match with Avalanche. Not a very good match, but it's a match with Avalanche. So Sting's 1994 was pretty uneventful. He really didn't do much. He was just there. I kind of felt in 1994 he was kind of pushed to the background. Here he was, the franchise for all these years. Like I said, the guy that never left, the guy that carried the load, the guy that took on every bad guy that came through the door. Whether it was Cactus Jack, whether it was Abdullah the Butcher, whether it was Rick Rude, whether it was the Dangerous Alliance, the Four Horsemen, no matter who it was, Sting was there. What did Sting's song say at that time? If his friends ever need him, he's there to help. And that was that was basically Sting's attitude. If his friends ever need him, he's there to help. He was the ultimate good guy, never a bad guy, not in WCW. So we're going into 1995. And in 1995, he's teaming with the Macho Man, still taking on the Faces of Fear. He's still the Surfer Sting, still with the spiked hair and all that. Still, doing his ultimate good guy thing. Later on in the year, the United States Championship becomes vacated, and he and Ming go to the finals of the United States Championship match at Bash at the Beach 1995. But once again, he's pushed to the periphery. It's all about Macho Man. It's all about Hulk Hogan and Hulk Hogan's feud with Vader and Macho Man's feud with Ric Flair is taking up most of the TV in 1995. I forgot entirely why the United States Championship was held up. I think it had something to do with with the with Stone Cold Steve Austin, or Stunning Steve Austin, who was the United States champion at that time, quitting the company. But anyway, then he goes into a feud with Lord Steven Regal, and he's just basically all throughout 1995. Sting is basically just a lackey for the Macho Man Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan. Now Vader, his former nemesis, turns babyface. Ric Flair and Arn Anderson blame him for losing their 2-on-1 handicap match, in their 3-on-2 handicap match against the Macho Man and Hogan, and also for failing to defeat Hulk Hogan in the cage match at Bash at the Beach '95. So he turns babyface, and they formed their War Games team. So now Sting and Vader got a team together as War Games partners with Hulk Hogan and the Macho Man. And that doesn't last long because in the back, Vader has his backstage altercation with Paul Orndorff, in which Paul Orndorff knocks him the hell out. And Vader will soon be making his way to the WWF. But they got to bring somebody else in. And by Sting's recommendation, he calls on his best friend in the wrestling business, the guy that he started off with, the guy that was his tag team partner at Super Brawl 1 in 1991 against the Steiner brothers. And that's Lex Luger. They were best friends in real life. They were rivals. The last match Luger had in WCW, like I said, in '92 was against Sting. So he talks to Eric Bischoff, who's the new boss of WCW. Eric Bischoff is not so keen on it. He's like, I don't know, because I didn't really get along with Lex Luger last time he was here. He was kind of arrogant, kind of conceited. His WWE run didn't work out at all. He didn't win no titles in WWE. The matches with Yokozuna, both at SummerSlam '93 and WrestleMania 10, were complete flops. So I don't know about Luger. And Sting is like, just give him a chance. Give him the lowest amount of money that you can offer and see if he takes it. Luger takes it. On the first episode of Nitro on in September of 1995, during a match that Sting was having with Ric Flair. Again, they go back to this classic match of Sting and Ric Flair. Luger shows up, and people are like, oh, Mongo McMichael and Bobby Heenan and Eric Bischoff are like, oh, what is he doing here? And Bobby Heenan's like, he could belong here. This is a public mall. It's the Mall of America in Minnesota. So Luger shows up. He challenges Hulk Hogan. They have a match the next week. Now they've said that Vader's going AWOL. He's not in the War Games match against the Dungeon of Doom. So they need a fourth partner. And Sting vouches for Lex Luger. So basically what ends up happening for the next 2 months is that Sting is vouching for Lex Luger. Sting is telling the other two baby faces, Hogan and Macho Man, and Lex Luger's a good guy, you could depend on him, while Macho Man and Hogan are saying, nah, you can't depend on him, he has his own agenda, he's out for himself. Sting is still sticking by his side, even though the other guys, the other two baby faces are saying, no, he can't be trusted. Well, Halloween Havoc comes around, and Hulk Hogan has a match with the Giant, and Hulk Hogan does lose the match to the Giant thanks to interference from Lex Luger. Both Lex Luger and Jimmy Hart turn on Hulk Hogan. So it turns out that Sting was wrong and Macho Man Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan were right. But even though Lex Luger is a heel and he has Jimmy Hart as his manager and he's part of the Dungeon of Doom, he's part of this heel faction, Sting still refuses to not betray his friend. He's still a loyal friend. He's still by Luger's side. So what ends up happening, they end up winning the tag team championships, right? So what ends up happening, what will be like Sting would cheat. Luger would cheat, but Sting wouldn't know about it. It'd be behind Sting's back and behind the referee's back. And people would be like, can't Sting see that Luger's cheating? So it was like a heel teaming with a babyface. Luger was kind of in between a heel and a babyface. And it stays this way until Uncensored 96, when after Brian Pillman leaves to go to the WWE, they shoo Luger in the match as part of the alliance to destroy Hulkamania. It was an alliance between the Dungeon of Doom and the Four Horsemen to destroy Hulkamania. And it was like a bunch of guys, including Debo from Friday, who had returned to wrestling, and this other guy who they called the Final Solution. A bunch of guys against Hulk Hogan and the Macho Man in a cage in Uncensored 96. And Brian Pillman got kicked out and left the company, so they put Luger in there. And the swerve was that Luger finally declared his allegiance and turned good and helped out Hulk Hogan and the Macho Man. So Sting was proven right in the end, I guess. And his relationship with Jimmy Hart and the Dungeon of Doom, Luger that is, was no more. Now they're just tag team partners, teaming together, going against the Road Warriors who had just returned, going against the Steiner brothers who also just returned, Harlem Heat, having good matches basically. But something in 1990, it's 1996 now, something in 1996 is about to happen that is going to change wrestling forever and change Sting forever. And that is Memorial Day of 1996, Scott Hall, who was formerly Razor Ramon in the WWE, jumped ship from the WWE to WCW. We all know Steve Dahl's out there wrestling. Mike Enos, who is the Mauler, managed by Colonel Rob Parker, is out there wrestling. And what do we see in the crowd? Scott Hall in street clothes come down. He says, hey, yo, you know why I'm here. You know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here. In his Razor Ramon fake Scarface accent. So the implication is that the WWF is invading WCW, right? In WCW's home state of Macon, Georgia. So he does this later on in the night, and he does this the following week. But the following week, who confronts him? They're hyping up Sting's match against the Giant at Slamboree that year. Sting confronts him. Sting, the franchise of WCW, and he slaps Scott Hall. He says, you're in WCW. You're in the jungle, baby. this is WCW. Basically threatening him. You know, don't try. This ain't the WWE. Don't try that shit over here in WCW. This is my territory. So Scott Hall pays it no attention, and he next following week brings out Kevin Nash. Kevin Nash they're now billed the outsiders, and for weeks and weeks, even at the Great American Bash pay per view, which Sting wrestles Lord Steven Regal at. Um, they demand from Eric Bischoff. First of all, they declare that they're not from the WWF, that they're completely something different. The storyline is they were two guys in WCW in the early 90s, Kevin Nash as Vinny Vegas and the Oz and Master Blaster Steel um, and Scott Hall as the Diamond Stud. They've come back and they felt like WCW didn't give them a fair shake. They've come back to get their revenge, as it were. They powerbomb Eric Bischoff through a table, and they say, "Bring out three guys, and it left us in suspense. It's kind of like now, kind of like the storyline we see on TV right now, where we don't know what it's going to be. Each and every week, The Rock and Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins and Cody Rhodes reveal a little bit more and a little bit more. Well, that was kind of like this storyline. We didn't know who the three guys were going to be that WCW was going to put up to defend against these two outsiders, but we soon find out. The night after the Great American Bash, we found out there's going to be Lex Luger, Randy Savage, and Sting, all dressed up in Sting makeup, right? All dressed up in Sting's makeup. And it's a pretty good match. Sting is in the ring. He's battered up when Hulk Hogan comes down. Luger's already been knocked down. Hulk Hogan comes down. The crowd goes crazy. Hogan rips the T-shirt off. Randy Savage is laying in the corner. Boom, Hogan drops the leg drop on Randy Savage and turns heel and the third man in the NWO and the basically the formation of the NWO. Now, what does this got to do with Sting? Obviously, Sting is the franchise of the of WCW. He has to do something to defend WCW, right? Well, he, like the rest of WCW, keeps on losing. He and Lex Luger even lose the tag team championships to Harlem Heat because they were distracted by the outsiders coming to Nitro with bats. Road Wild 96, they take on the outsiders and they even lose that match thanks to the interference from the crooked referee, Nick Patrick. WCW is just losing and losing. Hulk Hogan has now captured the WCW Heavyweight Championship from the Giant at that year's Hog Wild. They were still allowed to call it then. Harley Davidson wasn't suing them. So they've beaten everybody. Eventually, they beat the Macho Man Randy Savage and Halloween Havoc. But before we get there, we got War Games on our minds. In War Games, Sting, who's a babyface, Luger, who's a babyface, and the Horsemen, who are heels. Now, keep in mind, the Horsemen and Sting and Luger, they all have history, especially Sting and the Horsemen. He came into Jim Crockett Promotions in 1988, feuding with the Four Horsemen. He's had his classic matches with the Four Horsemen, many classic matches with the Four Horsemen. He defeated Ric Flair and for his first heavyweight championship in Capital Combat in 1990. He even enlisted the help of RoboCop to take on the Four Horsemen. Sting has been up and down with the Four Horsemen. He was kicked out of the Four Horsemen. So why should he, and not to mention, I didn't mention this storyline, in Halloween Havoc 95, when the Four Horsemen reformed in 1995, it was Ric Flair who turned his back on Sting after Flair begged Sting to be his partner. He said, "Be my partner, Sting, be my partner, Sting," because he needed somebody to help him take on Arn Anderson and Brian Pillman, right, and even the odds. But what does he do? He gets so-called injured in the back, and then Sting is wrestling the match all by himself. And then he comes out and he turns on Sting. So at this point in 1996, Sting is like, how can I trust Ric Flair? How can I trust Arn Anderson? These guys have turned their back on me forever. Like forever they turned their back on me. How can I trust them? Well, he takes his chances. And on an episode of Nitro, what do we see? We hear Sting in a limo chatting with members of the NWO. Now everybody's confused. Lex Luger's confused. Arn Anderson's confused. Ric Flair is confused. They're all confused. They don't know what's going on. It's like Sting, the newest member of the NWO, it can't be. Sting is saying, no, it's not me. No, it's not me. But there's a guy, Jeff Farmer, who looks exactly like Sting. He looks just like Sting, right? And fans are fooled until Fall Brawl comes. Everybody comes out on the NWO side. It's their version of Sting. And then the WCW side, Sting also comes out. He makes a flurry, and then he beats everybody up, and then he leaves. And then the next night on Nitro, what does he say? He says, I came out here, paraphrasing, I came out here and I told you guys that I was an NWO. I came out here and I proved myself to Lex Luger. I proved myself to Ric Flair. I proved myself to Arn Anderson. And you still didn't believe me. So to all you fans, commentators, or whatever, you can stick it, echoing Hogan's words from Bash at the Beach 96. And Sting is different now. He's in the rafters. He doesn't speak for a year and a half. He has the crow gimmick because his gimmick from the 1980s was getting very tiring. People were tired of seeing it. You know, it was old, it was stale. So Scott Hall suggested to him, hey, why don't you be the Crow? And that's basically what he became. Anthony Freitas did the costume based on Brandon Lee's The Crow. And for a year and a half, Sting came down from the rafters. He would beat up the NWO. At first, we didn't know where his allegiance lies because the NWO would constantly court him, constantly trying to get him to join. You know, and up until Uncensored 97, it looked like he did join because he actually, the Macho Man left. He got defeated by Hulk Hogan at Slim Jim's Halloween Havoc. And then he was gone for a couple of months, and people thought maybe he would go back to the WWE. He didn't. He stayed in WCW, but he started following Sting around, and then at Super Brawl 7, he turns his back on WCW, helping Hulk Hogan defeat Roddy Piper for the championship. So Hulk Hogan hugs Sting. So we think Sting is going to be a member of the NWO because he has the black and white face paint on now. Nope. At Uncensored 97, the Uncensored that Dennis Rodman was in, after they win the match, they defeat Roddy Piper's team, which is mostly the Horsemen. They defeat WCW, which is Luger the Giant and the Steiner brothers. They're all celebrating, and Sting drops down from the Raptors. He beats up all the NWO, and he is now WCW. So now for the rest of the year, they're pushing for Sting versus Hulk Hogan at Starrcade 97. Honestly, the best build in the history of professional wrestling. People talk about The Rock versus Cena at WrestleMania 28, or they talk about the Mega Powers in 1989 in WWE, or the build now, which is the Bloodline storyline, The Rock versus Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 41. You know, it's going to be a year-long build. But to me, this year-long build felt organic. Like the Rock and Cena one, they had to do a year-long build because The Rock was going to be mostly in Hollywood. So, of course, they had to build it for a year. But this felt organic. Now, Sting would always sneak up on the NWO. He would beat up every single NWO member, including Dennis Rodman, but he would never beat up Hulk Hogan. Him and Hogan didn't touch for a whole year. Come Starrcade 97, people are like, okay, they've had a taste of Hogan losing the championship. Because on the 100th episode of Nitro, Lex Luger took on Hulk Hogan at the Palace of Auburn Hills in suburban Detroit, Michigan. The same building 3 years ago, he was supposed to win the WWF title from Yokozuna. He defeats Hulk Hogan. He loses it like a week later to Hogan again at Road Wild. They're calling it Road Wild now. But still, that was a taste of things to come. That Hogan would eventually lose the championship to Sting at Starrcade '97. That doesn't happen. I mean, it does happen, but it doesn't. Nick Patrick, Hogan drops the leg. Nick Patrick, there's a fast count. Supposed to be a fast count. It looks like a normal count. The fans are like, what the fuck? Sting lost cleanly. Bret Hart comes in, he punches Nick Patrick. He says, not again, because he had just been screwed over in Montreal at the Survivor Series. He's a sanctioned referee for the night because he was the referee, Larry Zbyszko versus Eric Bischoff on the undercard for the control of Nitro. So he comes in, he punches Nick Patrick. They ring the bell. Sting has Hogan in the Scorpion Deathlock. Sting wins. Now Eric Bischoff has said this. They said this was the thing that tanked WCW. WCW never really recovered. And Eric Bischoff has said that they planned to go with a clean win, of course, but Sting wasn't tan enough. He didn't look like he was in good enough shape, or whatever the case may be. But it was a convoluted win. Sting doesn't actually get the belt until Super Brawl 8, right? And he's the champion. And he's the champion for only a couple of months. It's not until only until Spring Stampede when he again loses the championship with help from Kevin Nash helping the Macho Man Randy Savage, because there is a split within the NWO. The NWO did not come to save the Macho Man in his match against Lex Luger at Sold Out 98. So he's now speaking up against Hulk Hogan. He's going against Hulk Hogan. And at first, Kevin Nash backs Hulk Hogan. At first, Kevin Nash is on Hulk Hogan's side. But after they have their tag team match and he accidentally hits Hogan, he turns on Hogan. He then goes with the Macho Man. Pretty soon, he and the Macho Man will form the NWO Wolfpack, a babyface version of the NWO. And they managed to get Conan on their side. They managed to get Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig on their side for a while. And they managed to get Lex Luger, which is one of the biggest babyfaces on their side. Now that they have Luger, of course, Luger is courting Sting. The NWO with two different factions now. It's 1998. They're courting Sting. People are like, what side is Sting going to choose? Is he going to remain with WCW, like guys like Goldberg and DDP are? Is he going to go with one side of the NWO? So they have this tag match with Luger, Kevin Nash versus the Giant and Hogan. The Giant, again, has switched sides. He's now a heel again. He's back with the NWO after being kicked out at the end of 96. He's back with the NWO. So they're celebrating because Sting comes down with from the rafters and he rips off the shirt and he reveals the NWO black and white. Now, the Giant and Hulk Hogan are jumping up and down. They're jumping up and down. But no, he rips it off and he can barely rip it off. Sting has trouble ripping it off. He tried to do the Hogan thing, rip the T-shirt off, didn't work. The T-shirt wasn't pre-cut. He just rips it off. And now Sting is in the NWO Wolfpack, changing his image once again from the white face paint to the red face paint. The pop was huge, and I remember this night when Sting turned NWO, joined the Wolfpack. And the pop was pretty amazing, crazy. But subsequently, they did nothing with it. He feuded with Bret Hart for a couple of months because Bret Hart now becomes a member of the NWO. He helps Hulk Hogan win the championship back from the Macho Man on a Nitro by nailing Kevin Nash with the title, whatever. And Halloween Havoc 98, they have a match. And everything is going pretty good with Sting with the Wolfpack, I guess. I mean, it looked kind of cool. But he didn't really do much in 1998. Like after his initial run in 97, again, he was pushed to the background. You know what I mean? Hogan and him, what an amazing feud they had all throughout 97, but pushed to the background once again as being part of the NWO. So we all know the story of what eventually happens. Hulk Hogan retires, claiming that he's, thanks to Jesse the Body Ventura, doing it in Minnesota. He's going to run for president of Jesse Ventura ran for governor. He's going to one up Jesse Ventura and run for president. Fly, and he's retiring from the NWO. Scott Steiner's taking over for him. So now he's no longer the leader of NWO Hollywood. That, of course, is a ploy. Then they have Kevin Nash defeats Goldberg at Starrcade with help from Kevin Nash, Bam Bam Bigelow, Disco Inferno. Scott Hall, Bam Bam Bigelow, Disco Inferno. Scott Hall tasers Goldberg. Goldberg's streak ends. Then the following week, Kevin Nash challenges Goldberg to a rematch in Goldberg's hometown of the Georgia Dome. And they have the rematch, but then Goldberg gets arrested for stalking Miss Elizabeth, which WCW wanted it to be a rape scene. Goldberg adamantly refused. So the NWO Wolfpack leader and the NWO Hollywood leader coming out of retirement now are going to face each other, and they do the finger poke of doom, and heel NWO are heels now again. They've reunited, and they're now the NWO Elite. Luger has turned into a heel as well. Luger is part of them. But what about Sting? What about the Macho Man? Well, Sting doesn't become part of the heel NWO. By the time he comes back in the spring of 1999, he is no longer a member of the NWO. He, in fact, returns in a fatal four-way match himself. Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, and himself, Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, and DDP, with the Macho Man Randy Savage as a special guest referee. He loses this match, and DDP wins. But Sting goes on later on that year to defeat DDP for the WCW Championship. Next thing that happens, Sting is now the champion. It's full brawl. He's saying that he doesn't trust Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan now a full-fledged babyface once again. He and Ric Flair defeated Eric Bischoff at Starrcade, became the president of WCW. And then he and Hulk Hogan had a first blood match, the first and only of its kind in WCW at Uncensored 99. Hogan turns face. Sting becomes good friends with Kevin Nash. Kevin Nash becomes the WCW champion, and he's feuding with the Macho Man Randy Savage. And Sting and Kevin Nash in a tag team match against the Macho Man Randy Savage and Sid, who's returned to WCW, lose the WCW championship for Kevin Nash. It's pretty weird. This is Bash of the Beach, 1990. Sting is accused of running Kevin Nash over with a Hummer. But after all that, Hulk Hogan, again, like I said, he's in the red and yellow, right? He's returned to the red and yellow on an episode of Nitro. Sting was in this. It was a six-man tag. Sting, Goldberg, and Hulk Hogan against Rick Steiner, Kevin Nash, and Sid. And Hogan came back as the red and yellow. But still, Sting is saying he doesn't trust Hulk Hogan. We're back to 1995. Sting saying we're in 1999 and we're still in 1995. Sting saying he doesn't trust Hogan. Sting saying that Hogan might turn against the people once again. So Hogan and Sting go for a match at Fall Brawl 99. And Sting does the unthinkable. After the match is over, rather than shake Hulk Hogan's hand in a sportsmanlike conduct, he beats up Hulk Hogan with a bat. But even though Sting's a heel now, Sting and Lex Luger are both heels now, the fans still cheer Sting. You know, Sting could never be a heel in WCW or pretty much anywhere. He was unhealable. So the storyline doesn't work, and it doesn't really last either. It lasts only a month when Sting and Hogan have their rematch, and Hogan comes out in street clothes and just lays down for Sting. And then Sting later on that night, he has to face Goldberg and get defeated by Goldberg. It is the first Russo-booked WCW event because Russo has just left WWE to go to WCW. Anyway, in 2000, they don't really do much with Sting. He has a feud with Vampiro for a little while. And he's again being pushed to the background because now Jeff Jarrett is there, and they want to push Jeff Jarrett. They really want to push DDP. At first, they really want to push Bret Hart too before his concussion. Push guys like Goldberg, the younger talent. The Eric Bischoff and Vince Russo reboot the WCW and the New Blood faction. And of course, Sting, being he's a veteran, he joins the Millionaires Club with Hogan and DDP and Kevin Nash and all these guys. And Sting, who's the franchise of WCW, is not doing anything else. Simple buried alive match with freaking Vampiro. 1999 and 2000 were the worst for Sting. Now we get to 2001, the last Nitro. It has been announced in the simulcast that Vince McMahon has purchased WCW. We don't know who's he gonna bring over. We don't know if he'll bring over Sting. He goes into a live crowd. He says, "Who do you want? Hogan, Sting, Lex Luger." He does all the Goldberg, all the poses in front of the live crowd. But we don't know who he's gonna bring over. Sting cuts a promo that night. He says, "The only thing that's for sure about Sting is nothing's for sure." And they announced a match, the very last match, the very last Nitro between himself and Ric Flair. So they started with Ric Flair and Sting, and they ended with Ric Flair and Sting, both on Nitro and in the Clash of Champions in 1988. So WCW closed its doors. The invasion angle happens in WWE. They only bring over DDP and Booker T. Sting does not come over. And later on, in 2003, when Sting signs with TNA, fans say, "Why didn't you go over to the WWE when they bought WCW? Why didn't you?" And he says, "Because when Booker T first debuted in June of that year, and The Rock just looked at him and The Rock says, 'Who in the blue hell are you?' He was like, I didn't want my career to end like that. I didn't want to be diminished like that. I didn't want to be humiliated like that. I didn't want The Rock or some other WWF wrestler to come up to me and say, 'Who in the hell are you?' when I've been in this business for over 30 years. You know what I mean? I didn't want to be buried like that." So he chose to go to TNA. And he was in TNA for many years. You know, it had its ups and downs. I can't really tell you the storylines in TNA because I really didn't follow them all that much. I know that when it came to the main event Mafia, like in '09, 2010, they tried to make him a heel. The main event Mafia with Kurt Angle and Scott Steiner and Kevin Nash and Booker T. They came out in suits. He didn't have his face paint. It still didn't work. The heel Sting just never worked. You know, he won the TNA World Title a lot of times. He had some good matches with Samoa Joe. He also, TNA Hard Justice 2011. Sting was involved in probably the most infamous incident in TNA history. When Jeff Hardy, who was the champion at that time, showed up so inebriated, so high, that he couldn't even perform. And Sting, being the veteran that he is, had to save the event, eventually just pinning Jeff Hardy. I mean, Jeff Hardy was completely high out of his mind. Who knows what the hell he was on? It's one of the most infamous moments in wrestling. Anyway, Sting stays with the company until 2014. There are rumors in 2011 that he's going to face The Undertaker because his contract was up that year. So they're like, okay, he's going to leave TNA and he's going to go to WWE and he's going to finally be in WWE and finally face The Undertaker. That was the dream match people wanted to see, right? No, he doesn't. He stays with TNA and he develops the Joker gimmick over time, inspired by 2008's Heath Ledger performance of the Joker Sting. Admittedly, I didn't see much of Joker Sting, so I can't really comment on the evolution of Joker Sting, like I can with the Surfer Sting and with the Crow Sting. But some people liked it, some people didn't. But again, in 2014, this time around, not like in 2011, but in 2014, he comes. There are rumors that he is going to show up in the WWE. Bill Apter released it on his website, and it's going to finally happen. Right? Survivor Series 2014, after Triple H's match, he comes out and he confronts Triple H. And that begins a feud with the Authority. You don't see much of him. We don't see much of him, until WrestleMania 31, when finally he sets up the match with Triple H. Now, this is Sting's first WrestleMania. He's never been in the WWE ever, right? You would think they would roll out the red carpet for the man. They would have Triple H put him over. Triple H comes out dressed up in the Terminator outfit because Arnold Schwarzenegger that year got inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. And Terminator Genesis came out. So big fanfare for Triple H. They have a pretty good, decent match. But guess what? Triple H wins. I mean, yeah, interference from DX, interference from the NWO. The NWO comes out to help Sting. DX comes out to help Triple H. But after two sledgehammer shots, Triple H wins. Sting's first and only WrestleMania match, and he loses. It didn't make any sense. It was complete bullshit. And then after the match, to top it off, he shakes hands with Triple H. Like, why? Why? Anyway, okay, at least. Um, why would they do something like that? Oh well, that that's just Vince's ego. He has to prove that WWF is still better than WCW, even though WCW had been out of business for a number of years now. And during Sting's time in WWE, they don't even acknowledge that he was in TNA at all those years. So anyway, it's not his last time. And apparently, they did that to hype up the next segment where The Rock brings out Ronda Rousey, and they set up a tag team, supposedly a tag team match for the following year. But Ronda Rousey ends up not doing it. The Rock ends up not doing it. Sting was supposed to take on The Undertaker, I think, at WrestleMania 32, but he got injured. I'm getting into that later. So he comes back for um, the Night of Champions. They have this storyline where Seth Rollins will wrestle twice, the John Cena challenge for the U.S. Championship, and Sting for the WWE Championship, right? Rollins. So Rollins and Sting are having the match. It's a pretty good match. People think, damn, Sting could win the WWF Championship finally for the first time ever. Well, Seth Rollins buckle bombs Sting, and Sting gets a stinger in his neck, and he can't even move, reminiscent of Stone Cold Steve Austin at SummerSlam '97. It's like, man, is Sting paralyzed? Will he be able to get back up? They do the X thing, the thing they do when a wrestler is legitimately injured. Well, they do that with Sting. And this basically ends Sting's career. Poor guy, and the following year he goes into the Hall of Fame in um, in 2016. But people say, and now he said, that his whole reason for facing Seth Rollins at that Night of Champions that year in 2015 was to get closer to facing The Undertaker. Unfortunately, he did not achieve that. And he left the WWE not so long after. And in 2020, he resurfaced back in AEW. Who can forget? It was the COVID years in AEW, but he comes back and Tony Schiavone is back on commentary, and he says, "It's Sting! It's Sting!" To hear Tony Schiavone, the guy who was there in 1988 when Sting had his first match, big time match against Ric Flair, and now Sting, 4 years later, is having his last match coming up in the Greensboro Coliseum against he and Darby Allin against the Young Bucks. A lot of people don't like the storyline of the Young Bucks turning heel, them being EVPs, them channeling the Jim Cornette attack by the Real Midnight Express on WCW Saturday Night in 1988 with the bloody suits attacking Sting's son. People are criticizing it. But well, it is what it is. Goodbye to Sting. Goodbye, Stinger. You had a great career. I really enjoyed your work. A lot of your matches, a lot of your storylines, and a lot of your energies. We'll miss you, Stinger. Love you. Peace. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.